All right, we're live.
All right. Thanks for setting this up.
Yeah, man, we've been trying to get together for a while now, and between our schedules and the technological whatevers.
You name it, it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So you were texting me yesterday about this bond issue, and I was thinking that would be a great topic to discuss, because our Keynesian government thinks that other than tax revenue, they can print us out of all of our problems, and unfortunately they won't just print tax dollars and let us all have like a decade tax holiday or whatever. But the problem you have with supply and demand is what happens when the debt you're printing, nobody wants to buy it.
That was my biggest question. That's the question for everybody to kind of think through, right? So let me just read you the audience a little bit of the text that I sent you, because this is legit something that we kind of have to work through. China is being out as a major bond buyer of U.S. Treasury bonds. This could have some severe implications, especially with other countries doing the same. So the first thing that comes to mind is, who's going to fill China's shoes, the number one debt holder of the United States? Them getting out of our bonds and treasuries and how the whole thing works, they're kind of stepping back. And what kind of pressure is this going to put on the money supply as it comes back? The dollar milkshake theory comes to mind, and you work in the banking industry. So that's why I sent you the question. Now, before we go on, China's been one of the largest foreign holders. With China no longer buying and reducing its holdings, that's a large potential source of demand for U.S. bonds. So with China and the Fed scaling back purchases, the U.S. will need to find new buyers. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because who are the new buyers?
That's the question.
Well, it's going to have to be somebody way smaller than China, right?
Well, if you are familiar with John Titus, he is Best Evidence on YouTube, and he's got a Substack. But he's really good at illustrating what the Fed does and how they do it and all that stuff. And basically, China has already been reducing their bond holdings for quite a while now. And so they've been like doing some financial alchemy between balance sheets, and they just keep pouring water in and out of each cup. You know what I mean? Back and forth. And that's what they've been doing. And they obviously know that eventually, especially now that there's BRICS and there's alternatives for other countries to store their money and get a rate of return and all these different things, they know that this well was going to dry up. And so my contention is this is part of fabricating the collapse. Instead of seeing this blazing issue that you're like, okay, well, who's going to buy this stuff? Well, they obviously know that. They're supposed to be smart, and they have algorithms, and they pay people 6-7 figures to do all this stuff. So they know that this is going to happen. So one potential option is nobody's going to buy them. And that's
pretty bad.
Almost what I think what they want. Yeah.
That's what China wants.
That's what I think the Fed wants, because if you collapse the system,
so
you have to replace it with something, and it'll be probably central bank digital currency.
Yeah, but they still got to sell bonds to fund their debt. It'll just be through the central bank digital currency, right?
Well, it's a crisis. So
borrowing $100,000 a second.
This has never happened before. See, they get to pretend like they're stupid. And so they create this crisis, and then they're like, huh, we never thought that this would happen. Like if we just printed trillions of dollars a year, like it wouldn't collapse on itself. And so, well, since it's so bad and the implosion was so bad, we have to be, it was just like all the overreaction to everything, and it gives them this big blanket to kind of do whatever they want. And now all the different smaller bank presidents I talk to, they say CBDC isn't feasible because the system can't make it work. And my two bank presidents claim that the system won't even be viable for 10 years. And I think this is why a huge implosion is necessary, because probably what they'll do is they'll sidestep the current system. And it just so happens that we have this new some type of clearinghouse, that's what I think they're going to propose.
Okay, you're gonna have to sum that up for me. They're gonna propose how are they going to cover their bills if their other countries are getting out of United States dollars? That's the domestic buyers of the bonds. And then you've got, if that happens, that's not going to be enough. So it's going to end in the Thunderdome being stupid high interest rates and making money harder to get, harder to borrow. And it puts me in mind of what's going on in Argentina. And that is something to really think through, because the government has not allowed them to get out more than $40 a day. These people have their money in their currency in the bank, and you can't go in the bank and get it. You have to go to an ATM that's got a big long line and get your little $40 a day. It is the most criminal thing to lock somebody's money up during a hyperinflation situation. But what they've done is they've killed velocity, which when you do that, you kill inflation. But I know Gammon was down there and he was saying nobody wanted silver, gold, Bitcoin. No, they wanted it. They just wanted dollars because they needed to eat.
Right.
It's a very strange thing that happened there that could potentially be here. You put us in you make everybody really need the dollar, and that's what they want, because that's how we transact. I don't know how the CBDC fits in there. Like you said, I don't think it's going to work either. It seems like they're putting afterburners on a dying currency, and it's just going to.
Yeah.
But they're not stupid. They're not acting like it. They're evil.
And you're making a very salient point here that I think a lot of people don't think about. When you have a currency restriction like in Argentina, and here you have alternative currencies, viable, not just viable alternative currencies. I mean, gold and silver, you have intrinsic value, right? But because of liquidity and because of the desire to eat food, you're willing to just be like, oh yeah, well, forget gold and silver, forget Bitcoin. I need fiat because I'm going to go buy a taco or whatever. And this is where preparedness and a large portion of preparedness, when we're watching these governments manipulate their citizenry, this is where parallel community, parallel economy comes into play. And this is why last month we started a local meetup, which we're having our next one, Saturday, June 8th or June 9th, whatever that Saturday is. And it's to start participating locally, right? So when you can't get stuff, like if you have a local community and you developed a network, we can start kind of practicing this whole barter thing and networking together to work outside of this system, because this system is designed, especially the supply side and this on-time inventory, it's designed to implode. So when we see these things, just like what's going on in the bond market, and I don't see any viable way they could even artificially prop it up. I don't see any kind of new derivative or whatever. I don't see how they can do it. They're going to try, but I don't even. I mean, that's such a great question. Like, who's going to buy these bonds? I'm thinking nobody. And so then the government is going to just say, well, we back the bonds that we've already backed. And I don't think anybody can project what's going to happen when that happens, when that shoe drops. It will be substantial. And the interesting thing, when we see, just like in Greece, they did the same thing in Greece with the restriction of people's funds and then negative interest rates and all this stuff. And we've seen this happen. So we can't ever think, well, it won't happen here. I mean, because of capitalism and America and all this stuff. It's such a great question, but I don't see. So if it's not China, if it's not a foreign investor, who domestically would buy that junk?
That's the point. Now, I want to read you just a little bit of what I wrote down, because as I was thinking through these problems, I was writing down the things that we do know. It's easier to approach something that's like, okay, let's try to wrap our mind around this. Foreign investors may become wary of risky currencies like the United States dollar, fluctuations or frozen assets, geopolitical tensions, making U.S. bonds less attractive investment. This could put upward pressure on borrowing rates. That is, so I think all that's right. I think it's going to make interest rates go to places we don't even think is possible. When I was talking about 10% interest rates, people are like, oh no, Chris, it's no way. It's 3.5 right now. And Ninja was talking about 13, 14. We might see interest rates go so high with inflation coming up so fast, we have this liquidity crisis where money's just hard to get. And now you have to think, okay, well, where does that put us with our precious metals? It could be the big snatch and grab for the central bankers to absolutely back up the truck and get as much of that stuff as possible. When the gold store in Venezuela or Argentina they don't really want to purchase your gold because they need to make a profit. So they're going to purchase your gold and give you the main thing that's needed that buys goods and services, because that's what this is all about. So that they're giving you the currency that you can buy goods and services, and they've got the gold. Well, what do they do with it? Now, and I'm not saying I'm still pro gold and silver. I think everybody should have at least 10% of their wealth in it. And that's also the reason you don't go 100% into any asset, because you don't know. You don't know what these crazy people are going to do.
Yeah.
Well, tell them if Argentina, if somebody would say, hey, you're only going to get $40 out of the bank, they would have probably prepared a little bit, bought some stuff they needed,
Right. And this is why 8 or so years ago, I started planning my food 401k, right? Because just assuming you're always going to be able to buy food and there's availability, and then there's this other question of liquidity. Well, you're assuming that the inventory is going to be there. And then secondarily, you're assuming that whoever's going to buy it is going to want whatever potential currency you're going to try to give them. And what we've seen with Zimbabwe and these hype and Weimar, it pops. I mean, and it is kind of cataclysmic. And
it's like going broke. It's real slow at first and then all at once.
Yeah. It happens like instantaneously. It doesn't like, oh, we'll have a couple of days. I think that's why they pumped the bubble so big, because they obviously know there are repercussions to this stuff. And they obviously don't care for the lack of, because the greater cause is being served.
Yeah, you'll have a 2-day notice today.
Yeah. Oh, and sorry, we thought we sent you an email late yesterday. So really, less than 24 hours.
I figure for a bank holiday, and then that's what they're going to. That's how they do the banking crashes when the bank goes insolvent. They do it on a Friday, and they, do their thing. Now in Europe, they're implementing a CBDC, and it is now illegal to spend more than $1,000 euro dollars in cash. Christine Lagarde came out and talked about that. So that's, and of course they say it's because of the terrorism that happened 10 years ago. I looked it up and said the terrorism she was talking about happened 10 years ago. So they were using these cards that were prepaid, and they were funding their way to terrorism. It's always to protect us, right?
Yeah.
Government's here to help. But that is, if you think about that, I can't spend $1,000 of cash. How much does $1,000 of cash actually buy? And what are they actually after? Total control of everything you purchase. Yeah. There's going to be a day where, and this isn't me talking, this is somebody that's way smarter than me. You're going to have a calorie. What kind of calories did you consume when you spent too much on calories, or they weren't the right kind, or it's too much protein? Your carbon footprint just went up a little bit. That all falls into play with what we're talking about. The CBDC.
Well, that's how you know. Yeah, and that's how you know. I mean, Chris, that's absurd. I mean, I got all this food. You mean they're going to try to ration me, and they're going to count my calories, and I can only have 1,300 calories a day? I'm eating 1,300 calories a meal right now. And it just is telegraphing that they are orchestrating a financial implosion that we can't even potentially describe. And one of the greatest ways to insulate ourselves, like, I think if you are in a city and you're stack 'em, pack 'em, track 'em, and you're high and deep and you're in the concrete jungle, just straight up honest, I don't think there's anything you do. I honestly think you're super screwed. Well, I don't see.
That's the next thing. That's the 15-minute cities.
Yep.
That's the
control.
And I've got a lot of footage of the Chinese people walking from through one gate to the next gate, actually going into another part. Maybe they're going from one 15-minute city to the next, and it's a facial recognition. Mm-hmm. And they also have a card. So in these certain cities that are to keep you essentially in one spot, a lot like a prison, like an open air prison. And you can't drive the vehicles you want to drive. They have big bolsters that come up out of the pavement. So a police car can go over them, and as soon as it goes over, it comes up. I mean, this is for real. It sounds like the craziest thing, but other countries are implementing this. They've got cameras that analyze everything. It's 1984 is their playbook. And I would encourage anybody to check out 15-minute cities. And even if you have already and you know about them, see the ones that are in place, and the razor wire going around the top of the fences, the bolster stopping vehicle traffic. And as you get into that, you're going to learn about your carbon footprint and how much carbon you're consuming or making, or however they look at it. And that's, you can't do that. It's too much to have meat. You're going to eat way less meat and a whole lot of bugs. It's the fastest growing industry I know of. This bug industry is going to grow up 26%. I know I'm getting all over the place, but this is all, it's all part of it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned China. A real good friend of mine that I work with was a missionary in China. And he said, when the whole mask thing happened here, I was like, well, they've been doing that in China for like forever, right? And that's the whole point. Is if you read Carol Quigley's book, Tragedy and Hope, and the whole Anglo-American establishment, and you have Brzezinski Brzezinski, Zbig Brzezinski, and Henry Kissinger, and they were like, we want a communist utopia, and it'll be China. And so we're going to build that infrastructure. Then we're going to take all of our manufacturing, we're going to ship it over there, and then we're going to fake all the Americans out because we're going to make everything for pennies on the dollar, and they'll be able to buy it for pennies on the dollar. So it looks like hyperinflation isn't hyperinflation. And then they'll turn around and not have any jobs and any manufacturing. And we'll show them all the virtues of communism and how great it is. And this isn't your old school communism. This is this hybrid communist capitalistic model that is just wonderful. So they start wearing masks like back in 2010. And so when they're said, hey, put a mask on. Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, I already wear a mask, And when they're like, well, you have to live in this city, they're already pre-programmed to it, And so we can clearly read the tea leaves and see what the end goal is when we see what's being implemented in other countries. And it's very foolish to watch this stuff happen and just the normalcy bias of, well, it could never happen here in America, It's just
that was the biggest takeaway. That is the recency bias is overwhelming. It's like we've never had a war here. It'll never happen. We've never had hyperinflation. Nope, never happened. And I can't. When you study history, nothing ever stays the same. Cycles happen. They happen to be 100-year cycles. A lot of it, and it's a whole different way to think about it when you really play it out like we're kind of presenting kind of everything that's coming together to encourage the CBDC and what's going on in other countries and the 15-minute cities. You cannot forget about the 40 to 60 illegal migrants that Chuck Schumer just came out and said, you need to embrace these illegal migrants. If you don't, you can forget about having a better future in America. That right there, I knew that was coming. I knew that was in the mail, because who do you think is going to live in the 15-minute cities with you that'll work for way less? It is going to hammer the middle class. I have been, last month, I was in the airport in Shreveport, and there was, 40 or 50 migrants toting little sacks, government issued bags with their last name, number. They all had government issued stuff, and they all had a sack lunch. There's somebody there giving them food. Asked the security guard, says, is this what I think it is right here? Is this illegals getting shipped on? He said, yeah, that happens all the time. Shreveport, Louisiana. Yeah. It's everywhere. So you have to think about all the decay that's happening right at the moment where Trump's being indicted, the big distraction over here, the big distraction. And they're rolling it out right now. Our life is changing faster and faster, and more people are starting to wake up and see it, because this is crush the middle class. You'll have the super elite that own everything, like China, the CCP, and then you'll have the peasants. This gap didn't used to be that big. It used to be, maybe doctor, lawyer. I'm sure bankers have always been up here, and then you had like carpenters, electricians. But now it's getting further and further and further apart, and whoever owns the tech and the cities and all that, and that rent you things, they'll be the elite. It's and it all starts with how they do it. How do they implement it without freaking everybody out in the short term? And I think they're doing a great job.
And one of the easiest ways to implement it is to have an illusion of a democratic republic, right? Where you have two sides. And I'm old enough to remember when Republicans were supposedly fiscally conservative, and there would be this debt ceiling talk. Even though the debt ceiling always got passed, they used to resist it. And, then they would say, well, grandma's not going to get her Social Security. And then they pass it. Well, now it's an absolute given fact. And it proves to me there's no political solution, because if you don't have anyone that is demanding fiscal responsibility, a financial tsunami is absolutely imminent. And so it's amazing because both sides have just embraced spending, deficit spending. I mean, Reagan really started this. And we have just embraced deficit spending, and that chicken's going to come home to roost. And it'll be very interesting. Yeah.
So going back to what you were saying earlier, it was about, oh man, I have to tip my tongue. It was about, I should have wrote it down. I'll think of it a minute. But it was going back to the bonds and the inflation, bonds coming back, people not buying our bonds, the money situation, thinking through how they're going to implement the CBDC, complicated with immigration, and I wanted to mention taxes. So when you start to look at what's happening, I think they're going to start taxing precious metals, land, if you don't participate in, because there's not going to be a way to transact outside of the CBDC. And if you're using dollars, like it's illegal to use cash in London, if you're using the CBDC to buy precious metals, who's to say there's not going to be a 50% tax? They're already trying to do it with stocks. They're trying to do an unrealized tax on stocks you haven't even sold. That's not me. That's the freaking news. That doesn't make any sense, but it makes perfect sense if you realize what their dystopian future is, and it's exactly that. So the tax situation on top of the CBDC, that's the big one. That's to me, because that's how they get the big criminals, right? Al Capone didn't get caught for doing his stuff. He got busted for taxes.
Yeah, that's how they do it. And that's why with all this carbon credit and green stuff, the next phase of this financial alchemy with all these derivatives are going to be these green derivatives, like your soil biome, and like maybe if you have a fruit tree, well, that produces a yield, and so we need to tax that. So if you have dirt and you grow food, you got to pay, and because we are they, them, and those, and you have to pay your vig to the mafia if you want the protection. And that is the next phase of this green agenda, is synthesizing and monetizing everything, like life, like DNA, GMO, mRNA, all this stuff. They're going to monetize the molecule, and then they're going to tax you on it. And that's the next phase.
The carbon credits, the carbon footprint, that's actually a really big one right now. And I'm involved in it a little bit with the stuff that we're building for the natural gas industry. They can't emit natural gas into the air anymore. That messes their carbon footprint up. And the motors that we have to use have to be super EPA friendly, because that also reduces their carbon footprint. And if you'll kind of think through that, what's gonna reduce my carbon footprint? Oh, not driving a gas or diesel vehicle. staying in, where the trains are close, where you can go around on public transportation. Like you said, growing food, cows, man, they're getting hammered. The cattle herds are as low as they've been, and I can't remember when. I mean, they're doing their
60 or
best.
70 years. Yeah.
That's crazy. And when does that recover? I don't. There's no telling.
Did you just yesterday a big chicken house burnt down? Like, I don't know, 1.5 million chickens in Illinois. Yeah, and then how do you ever recover from that when there's already a deficit? And it was an accident, I'm sure.
Well, if you're in the city, there's a lot of people that are, and
Yep.
I would have an exit strategy for sure. The first thing that comes to mind around here, if you go full Thunderdome, and that's what we're having to start doing, it's hard for me to get there. It's hard for me to think full Thunderdome, like infrastructure collapsing type stuff. But if you'll think through it, in Louisiana, there's a bridge every mile or two, and they're all horrible. They're falling apart, and it takes them about 6 months to patch a hole on one. That's something I think about in the city too. I'm trying to get out over waterways, and we live in the country, and it's even me too, because I think infrastructure is one of the first things that's going to go down. The bridge gets a hole in it. Well, they shut it down. Well, that cuts me off immediately. I can't go that way. I just can't. If they shut that bridge down, that's over. There's 3 more in a row, another couple miles the other way. So it starts making you think, if you go full Thunderdome and that's the situation, because you don't need those roads. You should be living closer to town. And that takes you back to taxes. Well, they're going to tax your property. You live on you've got 20 acres. You're one person. There's no way you need 20 acres. You need to live a little closer. And if you want to stay out there, that's fine. You'll just have to pay a massive tax for living so far out. And your carbon footprint will be way high. So your social credit score won't be very good. And if you go back through the stuff that I watched through China and other people that are implementing it, that has everything to do with whether you get to travel or not. If your credit score is not bad, your social credit score, and you swipe your card and it does your face, the buzzer goes off. Woo! And somebody comes over there and like, hey, you're going to have to stay put. Go back to your little apartment, sit there. That's full Thunderdome, but that's what they're doing in other countries.
Yeah, and don't complain about it, because then you'll automatically have a red card.
Yeah, they do. They do public shaming. That's a big thing in China. Put your face on a billboard and shame you because you got caught jaywalking or something, or whatever it may be. But I think that's in the mail. I don't know when it's going to get here, because we've got a lot of things we got to get through. We got a lot of. They've got to deploy the CBDC somehow. They want to. That's obvious. We're the only country that is not on the roster. We're the only country that's not on the map of all the 135 other countries that have a pilot program for a CBDC. And I'll actually share the map. I'll post it or a clickable link. You can check it out, because it's you can zoom in on the country. You can click on it and you can see what digital assets they're using to implement this pilot program. The United States is in there. It's within the other countries, but it doesn't have one of their own.
Right.
So it's we're not quite there yet, but that's the thing. And the saddest part about it is when there's nothing else to do, go to war. That's the last thing. And they're everywhere at the moment. You got Israel, Ukraine, China want to move on Taiwan. So I think we've got that to look forward to as well.
Well, and if your only other option to vote for as president is supposedly a felon, and you have an air quotes election and you only have one person to vote for, then what happens? And if what they want to happen doesn't happen, all they have to do is release all these military age UN troops that are sprinkled everywhere. And then they get the same thing regardless of which way the wind blows, you know? If they
Every
can't,
night I saw in the report was military age fighting males.
yeah.
There's no, I mean, I wish I could say different.
Yeah, it's a multi-pronged approach. And, you know, it can be overwhelming if you fixate on it, you know? So what we try to do is we focus on the stuff we can do. We do that every day. And then we want to encourage people. That's why we started this meetup. I think it's really critical is meeting the people in your area, finding like-minded people, networking with them, finding out what they're good at, finding out what you're good at, and creating this parallel system, because the mainstream systems are in the bag. You know, it's everything has been co-opted, for lack of a better term. So we, as free-thinking human beings, need to, one, recognize it, and then two, oh, well, when it pops, that's when I'll do it. That's when I'll worry about it. Well, when that happens, it's too late, you know, because there's so many things that are going to happen that we can't even project or fathom, just because it's all going to be brand new. So if we start networking now, practicing now, working together now, doing the opposite of what society has been leading us towards. You know, the society is virtual, it's social media, it's vicarious, it's the metaverse, it's Oculus Rift, and it's, you know, altered reality and all this stuff. So we need to do the opposite of that. We need to meet together, eyeball to eyeball, talk, encourage each other, and then start building a community that can help each other, that can network, that can barter, that can share. And honestly, that's the only solution, because
can you tell me when the meetup is again? So for the other people that need to
it's going to be, you can go to the links below and you can see our 2024 events, and it's coming up not June 8th, I think is next Saturday. And so it's June 8th, and it's from 10 to 12, and it's at Grumpy's Garden Club in Gladewater. And you can check out the TexasBoys.com. You'll see a map, and we're going to be there. The permaculture consultant is going to be there. Our last meetup, we had about 30 or 40 people, and it was great, you know, and a couple drove as far as Arlington. They drove like 2.5 hours, you know, and so we want to continue to build that, grow that, network together, and come up with parallel solutions. And the best part is maybe it won't pop the way that I think it has to. I mean, I don't see any way that this can't happen. Like, I don't see there's any way. What'd you say? $100,000 a second?
That's what it was. I think it went down to like 85 or 90.
I mean,
we're really set back.
Yeah, like what difference does it even make? that kind of volume.
You mentioned waiting to get prepared, waiting to get precious metals, waiting to whatever. Mike Tyson said it best: everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the mouth. But if you plan to get hit in the mouth, you'll have you'll be, if you wait, you're more than likely going to make the wrong decision. If you wait and your precious metals go straight up, or if you wait and food, you can't get it, and you run out and buy, because when it happens, all that stuff skyrockets. We've seen this before, 2020, Y2K, if you remember that, the prepper foods went to the moon, and then people bought it at very high prices, and then it came down. So you might miss out on that bad decision that people make when they're in a bind. When you get in a bind and you got to make a quick decision and it's all coming apart, you're more than likely not going to make the very best decision that you've been thinking about for a year or two and preparing for it. If that makes any sense. And going to the meetups really, really helps. If I would be there, I will be in Oklahoma June 8th.
Okay.
Yeah, otherwise I'd be there.
Well,
that's the fix. That's the thing.
The website, because we'll set one up for July and August. We might change the venue a couple times, just to move around a little bit to try to reach more people. But I think that that's the solution as far as this attack. When you think of what they've been doing financially, and then we're being invaded. I mean, it's everything all at once, like when you talked about war, you were thinking about the Middle East or the Ukraine or whatever, and nobody wants to think about it here. But I mean, they're obviously planning for that. It appears like they're planning for that. They did Jade Helm back in 2016. And now for some reason, all of these people seeking asylum are 30-year-old males from China and everywhere else. You would have to be very naive to not see that they're planning something substantial and significant. And when you just consider a small slice of that pie, like, hey, wait a minute, what happens if nobody buys our bonds? What happens if nobody buys our debt? Like, what happens? How does that work? And I don't think anybody can unpack that. And that is just one grain of sand on the scale when you consider what's currently happening.
It's a gray swan, I guess. We can see it, but it hasn't made any difference so far for us. So I guess it won't, right? Go back to war real quick, because this is something that nobody's really talking about, and I haven't made a video about it yet because the first casualty of war is the truth. But what I do know, and I think we can all agree on, and it doesn't matter if you like Putin or don't like him or what your views are, because am I right when I say he usually does what he says?
Historically, he always has.
Okay. He's a leader. Whether he's leading in the right way or not, that's not, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm trying to push the point is the man came out and said, you're putting Ukraine in the UN. We're going to target densely populated Western areas. That's what he said. Now, so why wouldn't he do what he said? They're the only people I know that got hypersonic missiles.
Yep.
According to the military people that I've talked with. Now, I know that's very doomsday, but it's worth noting that this stuff it's never been like this before. I've talked to my grandfather, my dad, everybody that I know.
Chris, it's absurd.
And they're like, no, it's never been like this. It's
of
never.
Course. I mean, Russia's nukes are so much more advanced than ours because of all this nuclear proliferation and all this nonsense. So their nukes are way better than ours. So why even fabricate and push this whole stupid Ukraine thing for the sake of democracy or whatever, this old talking point about how we drop democracy everywhere, and we've been so successful nation building around the country, around the world, and around the country for that matter. But this is so intentional, and a byproduct could be our major cities get nuked. Like, why would you even entertain the thought, let alone fully fund it, full court press? But Ukrainians, they need freedom. Like, are you crazy? Like, and once they get freedom, once they win, Chris, how do you maintain that? You don't. It's a fool's game. It's designed to fail. It was never intended to work.
Right. Well, you've got Israel and the Gaza Strip and all that going on.
Yeah.
You've got China taking Taiwan. They've made that very plain, very clear. That's theirs, and they're going to go get it. The Ukraine debacle, who knows? That's a rumor of war. You ask me. There's been more bars and nightclubs and restaurants opened and functioning than before the war. So I don't know. Explain that one to me. But if the United States gets so stretched out to taking care of everybody and getting in everybody's business without taking care of their own, we're looking at, you can call it a black swan if you want to. It looks pretty obvious to me that we're going to get to see some type of retaliation from Russia here. That's what he said. That's the only reason I say that, because he usually does what he says. As far as I know, he's done everything he said.
Well, the beauty of him saying it, even if he doesn't do it and our deep state does it, to blame him on it. You know what I mean? That's the problem. Why I think it's just as much a reality is because it's a good excuse.
Nord Stream pipeline type thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. But we have a catbird seat to the show. You know, we're this is all part of it. It's all part of God's plan. We don't understand it. And a lot of people argue with me, no, God would never want this. He hardened Pharaoh's heart. All right. The Israelites wandered around the desert 40 years. You know, the Jewish people have been hammered over and over. And it's because I think, or it is actually, it's what he said, was to punish him. You know, you don't get to get so far out of his will, or you just get to go and do whatever you want. Doing whatever you want is actually the definition of Satanism.
Yeah.
That's the rules. That's the rules. What is the rule? Do whatever you want.
Right. And if that isn't modern day America, then nothing is. But the other thing is to whom much is given, much shall be required. And I mean, we've been given much, and the chickens will come home to roost, you know, and God will protect his people to the extent that he sees fit, you know, but that doesn't give us a license to stick our head in the sand and to be oblivious and stupid to it or ignore it. But we have to worship God in spirit and in truth. We have to recognize reality, because what is really happening is the truth. And we plan as much as we can. We do whatever is in our ability and power to do. We leave the results up to God. And God knows the end from the beginning. God knows how it's all going to play out. And one day he is coming back just to settle up the whole score and, you know, finish his work. So that's always a possibility. I know a lot of people want to gamble and just like, well, I'm going to bet on that, you know, like I don't really have to prepare for anything because God's just going to come back, annihilate all the bad guys, and I'm going to be all set. We have seen historically we have seen these culmination events, World War I and World War II. And as these global events are unfolding, it's very easy to look at prophecy and say, oh, no, look, we are right there. And so that means within a certain span of time, we're going to be here at the end, which makes sense. But in 2024, looking back at it, you're like, it wasn't what you thought it was.
So, for the year, I've never heard unprecedented so much since 2020. 2024 seems to be the year of all-time highs. Stock market, unemployment, everything is going crazy. I watch stock market every day, and I don't know if you can hear all these alerts going off, but every week or so we go back up to all-time highs. It is keeping it all propped up. It's a big house of cards, and we're just kind of waiting. And so I don't know a better time to prepare other than 20 years ago was probably the best. Right now is the next best time.
Yeah, that's what we want to do. We want to encourage everybody to just look around you, plan ahead, make friends. Don't become a hermit and don't ostracize yourself. Here's the thing, nobody is self-sufficient exclusively. No one, even if somehow they were able to be 100% self-sufficient, you could be 50% self-sufficient with a small community, and that community could thrive. And I think that's one factor that's never factored in. The social planners, they can play every card, and they're like, well, if we can't get the citizens to fight each other, we could do this kind of civil war or whatever, right? But when you play all your cards and you put everything in play, they can't always predict exactly how it's going to flop either. So if you want to be black pill and say they've already planned this stuff out and war gamed it and there's no option, that's just not true. They're not omniscient. They can't do that kind of stuff. So if we are looking forward, planning ahead, and I mean, how great is it? Like, you go to a meetup and like, oh, I live 3 miles up the street. Oh man, that's awesome. I before today, I never met you. Get to talk to you, get to shake your hand, see what you're doing, and just meet somebody new, encourage them. They encourage me. And I mean, that's the solution. That is the only way that we're going to get through whatever this thing is, however it's going to flop, when it's going to happen, why it's going to happen. Man, Chris, I was in the field, in the financial planning field with the .com pop. And I remember going to work every day and like, this thing can't keep going up. This thing can't keep going up every day, man. I would turn on the monitor, and then one day I turned it on and like, oh, there you go. No, it's not going to do that, And then I was still in the field in 2008, and I was watching the run, and I'm just like, this is impossible, and it was unsustainable. And so, this is going to happen again. I don't know when. I don't know how. It's going to be a magnitude of 100 or 1,000 of those little blips on the radar. And so that's why we need to be thinking differently. What leads to each one of these events is, well, we know from history, if we look at these historical projections, that if this happens, that'll happen, diversify your portfolio, 20% international exposure, all this stuff, right? Well, the rules are, all bets are off, man. There are no fundamentals. You can't trade on charts with teacups and candles and all these different things, I mean, the fundamentals are gone. So fundamentally, as individuals, we need to think differently, and we need to move forward with a completely new perspective on how do we interact with each other? How do we commerce with each other? How do we transact? How do we do this? Because this is what society is by definition. And in the event of, well, hey, you can't take any money out of the bank. Well, what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do? How are we going to interact? How are we going to transact? And then if we start considering that now, networking now, interacting that way now, when the time comes where we need to do that, it's going to be second nature.
There's no downside to meeting people that are like-minded. I've never regretted going to any event. I always have met at least one person that, usually way more. But sometimes you'll meet that one person that you're friends with forever and you can trust. When they tell you something's happening where they're at, then it's like, okay, well, then that's happening, you know?
Yep.
So I would encourage you to go check out the Texas boys for sure. I need to turn these alerts off because they're probably driving everybody crazy. Can you hear them? Can you hear them, Dan?
Yeah.
All right. That's I had some oil marks. You were talking about trading on fundamentals. I've lost a lot of money trading fundamentals. You can't. The market's completely divorced from reality. It's just nuts. Yesterday, real quick, I know it's getting long, but Ralph Lauren, I've been watching them because Ferrari, Ralph Lauren, Vera Bradley, things that people aren't going to purchase in the Thunderdome, right? So I'm watching them for a good short. The COO of Ralph Lauren came out yesterday or the day before and sold $11 million worth of their stock.
Mm-hmm.
And what should the stock do? Well, if you live in today's world, it goes all the way back up to the top, all the way almost to all-time highs. And these institutions are pushing it up there to get retail investors in, and then they're going to rip it.
Pump it up.
That's exactly what's going on. It happens every day. I watch it. It's completely manipulated. But I think we might be just getting started. I think when they do the melt up, it's going to blow people's mind. Maybe this is the melt up. Where are you at on that? I think we're in the middle of it.
Yeah. Well, they've been printing this money. The liquidity has to go somewhere. And honestly, man, I mean, we're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars. We kind of can't fathom. And the double bookkeeping, I mean, it could be tens of trillions of dollars. So you could see things go twice what they are now.
Right. And when they figure out that the gold and silver derivatives on SLV and GLD, that maybe 300 people own the same ounce of gold, that's right. When it get really wild. When that cat gets out of the bag, that's when it happens.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, man.
Yeah, man. I'm glad we could sync up our schedules, and we'll have to do this more often. And absolutely. For any of y'all watching on my channel, definitely go over and subscribe to Chris at Financial Prepper. They're great people. They're our neighbors next door. And man, I always have a great time when I hang out with Chris, and I can't appreciate them enough. And I'm glad that we can, I hope some of your people can come to our meetup. I hope we can be an encouragement to them. And
well, it's this Saturday or next Saturday, June 8th.
Yeah.
10 to 12, Glade Water. Right?
Yep. And all the directions are on our website, thetexasboys.com.
Cool. All right, man. Well, I've got some plasma work to do, plasma torch cutting work, and I got Jose looking at me like a deer in the headlights through the door.
All right, brother. We'll get to it. Appreciate it, man.
Have an awesome day.
You too, brother. We'll see you later.